The landscape of self-development has always been a field of paradox. For centuries, people have sought formulas for growth, methods for transformation, and maps for fulfillment. From ancient Stoic philosophy to modern psychology, from Eastern meditation traditions to Western motivational science, the quest has always been the same. How can one rise above limitation, expand potential, and master the mind? Yet despite the abundance of practices, strategies, and tools, many still feel as though something vital is missing. Progress occurs, but it is often linear, fragile, and easily undone by stress, habit, or unconscious resistance. The missing link lies not in adding another technique, but in shifting the very framework of thought. This is where quantum thinking enters, not as a metaphor, but as a paradigm capable of reorganizing the way consciousness engages reality. Classical self-development frameworks tend to rely on predictable cause and effect. Set a goal, take repeated action, reinforce behavior, and eventually, results accumulate. Cognitive behavioral models, affirmations, or structured planning share this underlying assumption of linear progression. While undeniably effective in producing incremental change, they often struggle to address the deeper mechanics of human transformation. The leaps, the nonlinear shifts, the sudden collapses of old identity patterns that make space for something radically new. The individual may succeed in cultivating discipline, but discipline alone does not guarantee evolution. One may reframe thoughts, but reframing alone does not rewrite the hidden programs of the subconscious. Quantum thinking begins from an entirely different vantage point. It suggests that the universe, and by extension the mind, does not operate purely by linear logic, but through fields of possibility. Every outcome exists in potential before it manifests in form. Every decision collapses probabilities into actuality. When one understands self-development through this lens, personal growth ceases to be a gradual climb up a fixed ladder and becomes a dynamic interplay with infinite possibilities. The individual is no longer simply moving from point A to point B. They're selecting from an ocean of realities, shaping identity not by force but by alignment. The power of this perspective is that it penetrates beneath surface behavior and addresses the structure of consciousness itself. Self-development is not merely about acquiring habits, but about transforming the quality of awareness from which habits arise. If classical growth is about control, quantum growth is about coherence. If the old model relies on willpower, the quantum model relies on resonance. This is why so many traditional methods feel incomplete. They work against the inertia of the subconscious rather than retuning its frequency. Neuroscience provides intriguing bridges here. Brain imaging has shown that thoughts are not isolated sparks of cognition, but electromagnetic events, radiating measurable fields. The HeartMath Institute has demonstrated that the heart generates a powerful electromagnetic field influencing both physiology and perception. When thoughts and emotions align, coherence is achieved and the body-mind system stabilizes into a higher order. This mirrors principles of quantum physics, where particles achieve stability through resonance and coherence within fields. Applied to self-development, it means that true transformation emerges when identity, thought, and emotion vibrate in congruence with a desired possibility. Incoherence, conflicting beliefs, scattered focus, emotional dissonance, prevents potential from collapsing into experience. Consider the phenomenon of self-sabotage. A person sets a clear goal, perhaps to improve health or advance in career, but despite best efforts, old patterns resurface. Linear psychology explains this as resistance, habit, or fear of change. Quantum thinking reframes it as a conflict of frequencies. The conscious mind may intend one outcome, but the subconscious vibrates in another. Reality reflects the dominant resonance, not the verbal intention. The missing piece, then, is not more discipline but alignment, tuning the subconscious patterns to match the new reality so that the collapse of potential becomes inevitable rather than forced. This shift is revolutionary because it recognizes that transformation is not mechanical but energetic. The self is not a fixed machine to be reprogrammed with commands. It is a field of information interacting with larger universal fields. In this light, affirmations become more than positive words. They become tuning forks. Visualization is more than imagination. It is a process of collapsing probability waves. Emotional regulation is more than calmness. It is vibrational coherence. These reinterpretations restore depth to practices that often feel superficial when divorced from their underlying energetic dynamics. The implications for self-development are profound. Instead of asking, "What must I do to change?" one asks, "What must I become to align with the change?" Instead of treating identity as an obstacle, one recognizes identity as the instrument through which reality is orchestrated. Instead of seeing the world as external and deterministic, one begins to experience it as participatory and responsive. The missing piece is not effort but perspective, not action alone, but awareness of the quantum field in which action unfolds. Philosophically, this aligns with ancient insights across cultures. The Upanishads taught that the self is not the body or mind, but the Atman, a spark of infinite consciousness. Buddhist teachings on emptiness highlight that reality is not fixed but dependently arisen, fluid, and interdependent. Western mystics spoke of divine imagination as the creative force of the cosmos. What quantum thinking offers is not a replacement of these traditions, but a contemporary language, grounded in scientific metaphor, to reawaken their relevance in modern self-development. It provides a bridge between spirituality and science, between mysticism and psychology, without diluting either. A crucial dimension of this paradigm is the recognition of the observer effect. In quantum physics, particles behave differently when observed, as if awareness itself influences outcome. Applied to the human experience, this means that self-observation is not neutral. It shapes identity. When one views oneself as broken, reality bends to reinforce brokenness. When one views oneself as evolving, reality organizes toward growth. Self-development without quantum thinking risks becoming an endless cycle of self-correction, because the underlying assumption remains, "I am not yet whole." But when the observer shifts to, "I am aligned with wholeness," the entire structure of effort changes. Growth becomes an unfolding of what is already present, rather than a desperate attempt to reach what is absent. This also transforms the way time is understood in development. Traditional models assume linear progress, step 1, step 2, step 3. But quantum thinking recognizes that time is not strictly linear in consciousness. Memories are not static. They can be re-encoded. The future is not distant. It can be envisioned and felt as present. When one vividly embodies the state of a desired future, the brain and nervous system respond as though it were happening now. Neuroplasticity rewires accordingly. Behaviors shift naturally, and the path to the outcome compresses. In this sense, self-development is not about chasing the future, but about embodying it into the now. The missing piece is the realization that growth is not temporal, but quantum, instantaneous when coherence is achieved. Yet, one might ask, if quantum thinking is so powerful, why is it not universally practiced? The answer lies in conditioning. Society has conditioned individuals to trust only in the tangible, the measurable, the linear. School systems train minds to think in sequences. Workplaces reward predictable productivity, and even many self-help frameworks echo this mechanistic model. To embrace quantum thinking requires a leap of imagination, a willingness to step into uncertainty and possibility. It demands courage to abandon the comfort of cause and effect logic and accept that reality is more mysterious and participatory than previously believed. Still, the signs of this shift are everywhere. Neuroscience research increasingly highlights the role of consciousness in shaping biology. Psychologists are rediscovering the importance of imagination and narrative in identity formation. Even in business and innovation, leaders speak of quantum leaps and disruptive creativity as essential to progress. What was once the language of mystics is becoming the vocabulary of science and success. The missing piece is being rediscovered, though often piecemeal and without full integration. Integration is key. Quantum thinking cannot simply be layered on top of existing habits. It must reframe the entire approach. For instance, in goal setting, instead of defining success solely in external terms, one asks, what is the vibrational signature of this goal? And how can I embody it now? In meditation, instead of merely calming the mind, one can enter coherent states that tune awareness to higher frequencies. In relationships, instead of managing conflict, one can align with resonance that dissolves conflict before it arises. These are not abstract ideas, but practical applications that shift the terrain of growth from effortful striving to natural alignment. The greatest obstacle is skepticism, the rational insistence that only what can be measured is real. Yet even science acknowledges that much of reality is unseen. Dark matter, quantum fields, electromagnetic frequencies outside human perception. The brain itself filters more information than it processes, creating a constructed version of reality that is already selective. To deny the role of unseen fields in self-development is to deny the very physics that underlie existence. Quantum thinking does not reject rationality. It expands it to include the invisible forces shaping visible outcomes. Perhaps the most transformative realization is that quantum thinking restores agency. Many approaches to self-development, though empowering on the surface, subtly reinforce dependence. Dependence on gurus, on systems, on endless effort. Quantum thinking reminds the individual that they are not a passive receiver, but an active co-creator. They are not bound by past conditioning, but capable of collapsing new possibilities. They are not victims of circumstance, but participants in a field of infinite potential. This agency is not arrogance, but alignment with the deepest truth of existence, that consciousness shapes reality. The missing piece has always been hiding in plain sight. The recognition that thought is not merely private chatter, but a creative force, that emotion is not weakness, but frequency, that identity is not fixed, but fluid, and that growth is not a climb, but a quantum leap. To live without this recognition is to build endlessly on shaky ground. To embrace, it is to anchor self-development in the very principles that govern the universe. Quantum thinking also redefines failure, a concept that has long haunted the field of self-development. In linear paradigms, failure is perceived as a step backward, a sign that one's efforts are inadequate. It creates a sense of deficiency, often reinforcing cycles of shame and discouragement. But within the quantum perspective, failure does not exist as a fixed state. It is only one possibility collapsed out of many, and it remains surrounded by countless other potentials. To fail in one outcome simply means that coherence was not established with that particular possibility. The field remains infinite, the probabilities still open. This reframe transforms failure into feedback, not as punishment, but as guidance. It shifts identity from someone who failed to someone still tuning to alignment. Such a perspective dissolves fear, and with fear dissolved, creative energy is liberated. This liberation is critical, for fear is the great constrictor of consciousness. Fear narrows perception, collapses imagination, and traps awareness in survival states. Self-development methods that attempt to push through fear without addressing its energetic frequency often reinforce the very patterns they seek to escape. Quantum thinking sees fear not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a frequency to be transmuted. By shifting awareness into higher states, gratitude, love, vision, fear naturally loses resonance and possibilities expand. This is not denial of fear, but recognition that one cannot collapse a reality aligned with growth while vibrating in the frequency of contraction. Another dimension illuminated by quantum thinking is the interconnectedness of self and environment. Classical approaches often emphasize individual will, portraying growth as a solitary climb. While discipline and independence have their place, they overlook the fact that consciousness is relational. Quantum entanglement demonstrates that once particles interact, their states remain linked across distance. Applied metaphorically, this suggests that relationships, environments, and collective fields deeply influence personal outcomes. To develop one's self in isolation is to ignore the entangled networks of resonance that shape experience. Quantum thinking invites a holistic awareness. To grow is not merely to change oneself, but to reharmonize with the larger field, relationships, communities, and even planetary consciousness. Self-development thus becomes ecological rather than egocentric, a dance of coherence with the greater whole. This view dissolves the illusion of separation, another reason traditional models feel incomplete. Many self-help frameworks inadvertently reinforce the notion of the isolated self, an individual struggling against the world, hacking their own mind, forcing growth. Quantum thinking reveals that the self is not a fortress but a node in a web, constantly exchanging information and energy. When one recognizes this, the strategies of development shift. Instead of endless self-analysis, one learns to tune into collective resonance. Instead of hoarding knowledge, one learns to participate in shared fields of growth. Instead of viewing others as competition, one recognizes them as mirrors, reflecting aspects of one's own potential. The missing piece, again, is this expanded awareness. Growth is not solitary striving, but resonance with an interconnected universe. Even creativity, often treated as a gift of talent or labor of effort, appears differently under quantum thinking. Creative breakthroughs are less the result of grinding persistence than of sudden quantum leaps, moments where disparate ideas collapse into novel coherence. Psychologists studying insight describe the aha moment when solutions arrive fully formed, without linear steps. These are not anomalies, but demonstrations of quantum processes in the mind. The brain, when released from rigid patterns, accesses fields of possibility where solutions already exist. Creativity is therefore not invented, but discovered, tuned into like a frequency. To practice quantum thinking is to cultivate conditions for such leaps, through openness, curiosity, and trust in the invisible connections of thought. One of the most radical consequences of this paradigm is the recognition that identity itself is fluid. Linear models often treat identity as stable. I am this kind of person, therefore I behave this way. Quantum thinking sees identity as a dynamic construct, a wave function of potential selves. Each moment offers the possibility to collapse into a new self-concept. One is not bound by the past, because the past itself is only one narrative among many. This understanding dismantles the prison of self-image, allowing for radical reinvention. It is not about becoming someone else, but about selecting from the infinite versions of self that already exist in potential. Growth, then, is not the construction of a new identity, but the recognition and embodiment of a higher frequency identity already present in the field. This has practical significance in areas such as healing trauma. Traditional approaches often require revisiting painful memories, analyzing them, and gradually reconstructing self-narratives. While valuable, these methods can be slow and re-traumatizing. Quantum-informed approaches instead focus on shifting into coherent states that allow the nervous system to encode new patterns. By embodying a future self free from trauma, the past loses its grip, not because it is forgotten, but because its resonance no longer dominates the field of experience. The nervous system learns safety not by endlessly revisiting danger, but by experiencing alignment with wholeness. Such methods are not escapes from reality, but engagements with deeper realities beyond linear time. The role of imagination becomes central in this framework. Linear development often treats imagination as secondary, a tool for relaxation or vision boarding. quantum thinking restores it to its rightful place as a creative force. Imagination is not fantasy, but the faculty by which consciousness interacts with possibility. The brain does not distinguish strongly between vividly imagined events and lived experiences. Both can rewire neural pathways. To imagine is to practice collapsing new potentials. Every vivid vision is an act of quantum selection. Dismissing imagination as childish is therefore one of the greatest obstacles to growth. To embrace imagination as reality's architect is to reclaim the missing dimension of self-development. Skeptics may argue that applying quantum principles to the mind is metaphorical rather than literal. They insist that physics cannot simply be transposed into psychology. Yet, even if one accepts it as metaphor, the paradigm remains powerful. Metaphors shape thought, and thought shapes reality. To think of oneself as a machine invites mechanical solutions. To think of oneself as a field of potential invites expansive solutions. Moreover, the boundary between metaphor and mechanism may not be as rigid as skeptics suggest. Consciousness remains the great mystery in science, and many leading thinkers, from Schrödinger to Wigner, have hinted at its quantum nature. Whether literal or metaphorical, the application of quantum principles provides a framework that linear models cannot rival. Another way to appreciate the missing piece is to consider the concept of synchronicity. Carl Jung describes synchronicity as meaningful coincidences that defy linear causality. Classical models dismiss such events as chance. Quantum thinking recognizes them as signs of resonance, moments when inner states align with external probabilities, collapsing into meaningful patterns. For those on the path of self-development, synchronicities often mark pivotal shifts, guiding them toward aligned outcomes. Without quantum thinking, such events are dismissed and their guidance is lost. With it, synchronicity becomes part of the developmental map, an invisible compass pointing toward coherence. Ultimately, the transformation quantum thinking offers is not merely intellectual, but existential. It changes how one experiences being. To live with quantum awareness is to move from scarcity to abundance, from control to trust, from isolation to participation. It dissolves the anxiety of striving, replacing it with the curiosity of unfolding. It removes the pressure to prove and replaces it with the invitation to align. Self-development ceases to be a desperate attempt to fix oneself and becomes an elegant dance of tuning into higher frequencies of existence. This is why it is the missing piece. Without it, growth feels heavy, effortful, incomplete. With it, growth feels inevitable, graceful, and whole. Such awareness also carries ethical implications. If consciousness shapes reality, then every thought and emotion contributes to the collective field. Personal development is not private. It radiates outward, influencing families, communities, and even planetary systems. Anger, fear, and division reinforce collective incoherence. Love, vision, and coherence uplift the field. This recognition dissolves the illusion that self-development is selfish. On the contrary, it becomes a moral responsibility. To align with higher frequencies is to contribute to the healing of the collective. To ignore this is to perpetuate collective fragmentation. Thus, quantum thinking not only completes self-development, but anchors it within the larger evolution of humanity. The vision is grand, but it begins with the simplest of shifts, noticing the observer. At every moment, one can ask, what state am I observing from? What frequency am I tuning? What possibility am I collapsing? Such questions restore agency to each moment. They strip away the excuse of powerlessness and reveal that the missing piece has never been external. It has always been the quality of consciousness applied to the field of possibility. When this awareness stabilizes, growth becomes not a project, but a way of being. The final challenge is integration into daily life. It is easy to speak of quantum thinking in the abstract, harder to live it in the mundane. Yet, it is in the mundane where transformation proves itself. Each choice, to dwell in fear or gratitude, to cling to identity or embrace fluidity, to force outcomes or trust coherence, becomes a microcosmic collapse of probability. Small acts of alignment compound into radical shifts. A day infused with quantum awareness is qualitatively different from a day lived in linear habit. Over time, the difference becomes undeniable. Life organizes itself around the resonance of the individual. Opportunities appear, relationships shift, inner peace stabilizes, and growth feels effortless. This is not magic, but the natural consequence of alignment with universal principles. The world stands at a threshold where such thinking is not merely personal, but necessary. Old systems, economic, political, ecological, are crumbling under the weight of linear logic. They attempt to solve problems with the same thinking that created them, perpetuating cycles of crisis. A quantum perspective offers alternatives. Not incremental reform, but quantum leaps in consciousness, technology, and collaboration. The personal and collective are inseparable. To embrace quantum thinking in self-development is to prepare for quantum transformation in civilization itself. The missing piece in personal growth may well be the missing piece in humanity's evolution. What emerges is a new vision of the human being, not as a machine, not as a victim, but as a co-creator with the universe. A being whose thoughts ripple into fields, whose emotions tune possibilities, whose imagination builds worlds. A being whose growth is not confined to effortful striving, but blossoms through resonance. A being whose journey is not toward some distant ideal, but into the ever-present potential of wholeness. To step into this vision is to reclaim the destiny of consciousness, to shape reality not through force, but through coherence, not through scarcity, but through infinite possibility. Quantum thinking is not just the missing piece in self-development. It is the key that unlocks the true nature of human potential.